Now we are joined from Cairo by Dr. Mohamed Osman, who's an international relations specialist. Welcome to Q News. The joint ceasefire proposal by Egypt, Qatar and the US, does it signal a renewed diplomatic momentum? And what has prompted this unified push now?
Thank you for having me, Mark. I think that the mediators are undertaking a very serious effort to reach a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza, at least a prolonged truce of some sort, so that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza can be alleviated, and the prospects of, or the chances even, of a sustained, calm, and permanent ceasefire can be enhanced, at least. As we have seen, Egypt has been engaged along with Qatar in these negotiations at very high levels. The director of the Egyptian intelligence, the prime minister of Qatar, and others. And of course, on the American side, Steve Witkoff has been the U.S. envoy to the Middle East. President Trump's envoy to the Middle East has been engaged in these high-level talks through communications and through telephone calls with many of those senior officials. It seems right now that the Americans have convinced, if not pressured, the Israelis at least, to loosen their negotiating stance. It seems that Israel now is willing to evacuate larger parts of the Gaza Strip. Before that, we heard that they were adamant that they will occupy the Gaza Strip, 40% of the Gaza Strip, for the entirety of the 60-day ceasefire, and that they will retain the option or the right to resume hostilities after the 60 days if Hamas does not disarm and surrender. This is what the Israelis used to say. Now they have loosened this position, and now they are talking about controlling a much smaller part of the Gaza Strip, about 20 to 25%, I think, including evacuating parts of the Mirage corridor in Rafah, and also, but still, they do emphasize that it will only be a temporary cessation of hostilities, and that they will retain the right to resume the war after 60 days expire if Hamas does not surrender and disarm. There's also the other question of the humanitarian distribution, or the entry of humanitarian aid and the distribution of humanitarian aid. Israel and even the United States are insisting that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation continues its rather shady role in distributing aid, even though it is basically a culprit in the ongoing genocide in Gaza by the way they deprive people of basic humanitarian needs, by how they endanger the lives of tens of thousands of Palestinians while they are receiving humanitarian aid. The Israeli army and even the mercenaries who are part of this Gaza Foundation shoot point blank at Palestinian civilians. About 1,000 of those died in the past few weeks, 1,000 Palestinian civilians. So still Israel insists that this will be the means by which humanitarian aid will be allowed to enter into and distributed in the Gaza Strip. And of course, Hamas and even the Arab mediators completely reject that. I think we are closer now than before to a temporary truce or a temporary ceasefire, which of course will entail a detainee exchange deal. However, I believe that actually reaching that is still a long shot.
Okay, well, we're going to come to some of those sticking points in just a moment. We mentioned in the introduction that Trump reportedly put pressure on Netanyahu after the church bombing, the strike on the church, and insisted that he make a public apology. How unusual is that? And do you buy it for a start?
Not really, not entirely at least. I think it's all for optics. I think it's all for the public consumption. President Trump and his wants to appear to his popular base as a good, virtuous Christian. And of course, the bombing of a church, and also a Latin church, which means it's a Western church, a Catholic church in Gaza, of course, is something that sparked outrage in many circles in Europe and the United States, of course. So he has to appear to take a strong stance on this. However, why are we acting as if the Israelis have not been committing systemic violations against the Christians of Palestine for the past decades. How the violations that are committed against Christians in Jerusalem at their own holy sites in Bethlehem, even the birthplace of Jesus Christ, and in Gaza. In Gaza, the Baptist hospital was destroyed or bombed several times, and there was a very notorious massacre that took place over there. Churches, Gaza has three major churches. All of them were bombed at some point in the war, let alone, of course, that 90% of Gaza's mosques have been destroyed as well. So it doesn't seem that the Israelis care about the sanctity of places of worship that much. And I think that the idea and the outrage over the bombing of the Latin Church will wither away within a few days. It's just very similar, if you remark, when the World Kitchen Organization (NGO), when one of their convoys or one of their vehicles was targeted in Gaza about a year ago, and European activists died. Everyone went up in arms and started criticizing Israel, and right now no one even remembers how those people were or their sacrifices. I think that what happened at the church will face the same fate. Unfortunately, I do believe that the Americans are trying to apply pressure on the Israelis so that there can be some sort of de-escalation in Gaza, even only if it's only for 60 days, so that more detainees can be released, and so that the United States would not be preoccupied with the Middle East for an extended period of time, so that they can allocate their limited resources to Ukraine, to East and South Asia, in order to focus on their confrontations by proxy with China and Russia. I do not believe, though, that they are interested in really controlling the Israelis and reining them in, as we have just seen in Syria. They have requested twice that the Israelis stop what they're doing. However, the Israelis had their way and dictated the terms, and still are dictating the terms for what's happening in Suwaidat. I do not see why Gaza would be any different.
Yes, it does seem odd as well. Well, as you mentioned, that Israel has hit many holy sites. That this one in particular is one that required an apology from Netanyahu, and also the claim that it was ammunition that went astray, which is also difficult to believe. But you're right, probably forgotten about by tomorrow. Let's come to some of those sticking points then, shall we? When it comes to withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, this is going to be quite a big one, isn't it?
I think that the Israelis now have been pushed by the Americans to present certain concessions in the negotiations, according to the reports we are reading from the media at least. And of course, we have to take that with a huge grain of salt, because so many times we have been disappointed by the falsehood of these reports. However, what we are hearing right now from Israeli media and the American media is that the Israelis are being more flexible and are now giving more concessions, that they are willing to evacuate larger parts of the Gaza Strip. And of course, that is something positive, because before that, they wanted to retain control over 40% of the Gaza Strip. And for more context, Mark, right now the Israelis occupy nearly 70% of the Gaza Strip. 70% of the Gaza Strip has been depopulated, and the population has been moved into a region that is basically a fraction of Gaza's size, given the fact that Gaza was one of the most overpopulated parts of the world. It's only 365 square kilometers big, which means it's barely the size of one of the large neighborhoods here in Cairo, for example. So you can imagine how overcrowded and overpopulated it is. So imagine moving about 1.8 or 2 million people to about 30% of this living space.
But despite them saying that they're willing to withdraw from some parts, they still have their heart set on this so-called humanitarian city in Rafah, though, don't they?
Unfortunately, yes, and they do enjoy maximum and complete U.S. support. The Gaza Foundation, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, is implicated in the schemes and the plans to construct this so-called humanitarian city, which is nothing short of a concentration camp. Probably it will be the largest concentration camp in the world since Auschwitz, or the concentration camps the Serbs built in Srebrenica in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia, before they butchered everyone over there, if you remember, Mark, these very vile times. Unfortunately, we are seeing some sort of repetition of these practices, and this humanitarian, so-called humanitarian city, this concentration camp, will apparently with U.S. support, and this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is American backed and funded, will be implicated in this criminal schemes.
And once people go in there, they're not allowed to leave. Is that right?
Exactly. So that's why I'm saying it's a concentration camp, because they will get in there. It's a fenced community. The local Palestinian, pro-Israeli Palestinian militias, pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli Palestinian mercenaries, tribal fighters over there will oversee this humanitarian city, and nobody will be allowed to leave. So even if the Israelis evacuate parts of the Mirage corridor, that does not mean that this area will not be under the control of the pro-Israeli militias who are Palestinian, unfortunately.
And it's really not the definition of a city, is it, when it's surrounded by fences and you're not allowed to leave? I just wanted to come on to more points of the deal. Reportedly, this includes excluding Hamas from Gaza's future governance. Do you think that is achievable realistically?
Hamas has expressed its will to surrender power or relinquish power in Gaza. Hamas has stated this position about a year ago, to their credit. And you know, I'm not a big fan of Hamas, but it is the truth. The Israelis are pretending as if this is not happening. That Hamas said, we are not interested in governing Gaza anymore. We understand that the circumstances and the situation right now will not allow for that. And nobody wants Hamas to stay in power, not even the Arab counterparts and even the other Palestinian factions. No one wants that. But this is not a problem. The problem is that the Israelis are hyper-focusing on other aspects, calling for the disarmament of Hamas. So what is the definition of disarmament? Hamas does not have any heavy weapons anymore. If you are speaking about rifles and pistols and some light equipment, every house in Gaza does have these guns, for example. So if we are speaking about the idea of disarming the Palestinian people of Gaza, this is an entirely different story, and it will basically be an impossible task. So it seems that the Israelis are putting impossible conditions all the time in order to leave no other choice but for their vile genocide schemes, like establishing this concentration camp in southern Gaza, and also pushing the Gazans to engage in the so-called voluntary departure of the streams. That there is a scheme in place under the auspices of the Israeli Ministry of Defense, aided by the Americans, unfortunately, and even by Western non-state entities, including one headed by former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, unfortunately, who are engaged in planning this scheme.
Okay.
So it seems, yeah.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there because we need to move on. But thank you so much for your input today, Dr. Mohamed Osman. I'll get that right eventually. International Relations Specialist. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program.